Yakuza 5, the last PS3 game in this series, coming out in 2012 and 2015 for us non-Japanese speaking mortals. And it's a surprising one because this series went through an engine change and it's quite noticeable. It's almost like a PS3 to PS4 difference. It's quite crazy they managed to pull out this at the end of the PS3 life cycle. Now, to be fair, I played the PS4 remaster of these games, which didn't get much of a visual upgrade, but does run really well, and it's hard to imagine that the PS3 version of this game runs that well. So take into consideration that if you're considering to play the PS3 version of this game. So what has changed with Yakuza 5? And well, the engine changes, it seems everything changes. There's a whole new set of mini games like air hockey and even car racing, which I totally wasted an entire day on. While you can't just GTA like drive around, but it's almost there. The arcade games now are also real games, quote unquote, as games that exist in real life, in this case being Virtua Fighter 2 and Taiko Drum Master. Size-wise, this is probably the biggest Yakuza yet, with 5 open maps, quote unquote, because one of these realistically doesn't have much to do in it, and it's more of a place for the story to take place in, but it has its own side quests, so I'm counting it. And it's just as detailed as the other ones. Even traversing is made slightly better with random fights, while still not seamless, taking a lot less time to get in and out of. Graphically, it's a night and day difference. Lighting and weather effects are a lot more detailed and noticeable. And it's in general, textures just look a lot higher quality, especially in characters' faces. It looks like a Yakuza game, but a much better looking one. By that I mean it keeps its aesthetic look while improving a lot purely on a technical level. This game had double the development time as the other entries up until this point, and it shows not only on the level of detail but also on the length of the game, which leads me to talk about the story. This game is long, like the longest in the series by far. From beginning to end, doing my Yakuza playthrough like I usually do, where I don't go for 100%, but I try and do some side quests that I find interesting and engaging, and I ended up taking over 40 hours just to beat the main story. And funny enough, Yakuza 4 had 4 protags. Can you guess how many 5 has? Yup, 5 protagonists. But the game is still, I would say, divided into 4 parts, much like in Yakuza 4. And this will be more understandable as I talk about each character individually. This time, rather than being the last, Kazuma is the first, taking place in Nagasugai. Kiryu is now living under a new name, and of course, because this is a Yakuza game, he's gonna get brought back into the mix of the Yakuza problems. Which for me, at this point, is kinda running dry already. I get it, that he makes the point that you can't just escape the Yakuza life, but I'll wait and see that point is done by the end of Yakuza 6, which is presumably the last Kazuma game as a protagonist. Gameplay wise, Kazuma plays much like he does in Yakuza 4. The leveling up system is now more of a mix of 4 and 3, still using a point system like 4, but now letting you level up each category in order, much like in 3, opposed to the more free to build your own character from 4, which I felt was a bit of a downside, but it's not like a big deal, and I found that it was a lot easier to hit the level cap with the characters in this one. You just seem to level up a lot faster, even when not doing combat. For example, I reached Kazuma's level cap while doing the taxi racing missions, which this one in particular is actually really addicting, like I mentioned previously when I was talking about the minigames. And it's kinda crazy, because it is a simple game once you think about it, It's not like they crammed an actual racing game inside of this one, but it's in depth enough that I'm like, yeah, I want to upgrade my taxi and spend 5 hours playing this. It also has a mode where you can drive a taxi like a normal taxi and obey the law. It's kind of like that thing we all at some point have done in GTA for the heck of it, but here it has its own mode and a point system, and it's oddly satisfying. Regardless, the gameplay feels nice even with the engine change. It still plays like a Yakuza game. Moving on to our second protag, Taiga Saejima, who is back with a new haircut so it doesn't look so much like a psycho killer from some edgy video game. And overall, he feels like a rethread. My guess is that the Japanese audiences really liked his character, so they just kind of made the same thing again. I'm just speculating here. But the way it goes is, well, Taiga ends up in jail again, and he escapes again. Yeah, Yakuza 5 story might be massive in scope, but sure has some problems for me. And this is part of why I have a big problem with it. A lot of the game can feel just like retread of older adventures, and for me it ends up overstaying its welcome, especially when it takes longer than the original stories did. Regardless, his story also takes place in Kamurocho and Tsukimino. In this game, Kamurocho, the main area of the Yakuza series, actually ended up being the city I spent the least time in this time around, and Tsukimino being the city I talked about in the beginning about being the technical fifth city, despite it being somewhat bare. And it makes sense that these cities would be chosen for Taiga, as his story has him locked in other locations outside of the open maps for a big part of it. Gameplay wise, Taiga is still the heavy, and he has a focus on slow, strong punches and blocking, over evading. What has changed is they have doubled down on him being a heavy character. Now, through some upgrades, being able to pick up even heavier objects in battle than any other character. For example, motorcycles, which not only look crazy but also do insane levels of damage. Moving on to our third and fourth protagonist. Yup, I would say that these mostly share one of the four parts of the game, taking place primarily in Sotenbori, one of the cities returning from Yakuza 2, and you'll be switching around between these two characters through this part of the story, and makes sense given one of these characters cannot fight like the others. But enough teasing, these two characters are Akiyama from Yakuza 4 and Haruka. Yup, Haruka. Famous for being kidnapped almost as much as Princess Peach, is now her own playable character, and she doesn't fight, but in fact dances, as against all odds, she ended up becoming an idol. If you're like me, you're probably wondering what that is, and I don't quite know, but the best way I found to explain it is, an idol is like a fabricated celebrity, and they have to be conventionally attractive and also able to sing and dance. And people like them, I guess. Yeah, it's one of those things that doesn't really appeal to me, but it's a thing in Japan, I guess. It's a thing here as well if you really start thinking about it. You know, Taylor Swift and whatever. I'm not gonna go down this hole. But regardless, translating this piece of the story into gameplay, it's oddly compelling. Yeah, growing as an idol and becoming more famous is oddly compelling. And now you can say that Yakuza game is also a rhythm game, officially. Before it was just a mini game. In fact, the Yakuza 5 story finds a lot of ways of putting its mini games into the main story, just as forms of introducing them, which I think is a good thing that the other games don't really do much. Yakuza 3 kinda tried it, but no, not really. But the rhythm games here is more than an introduction, as it is Haruka's replacement for combat. Instead of fighting, you can get into dance battles with other random girls on the street. They're not forced like regular random fights, and I believe this was done because realistically these dance battles go for much longer than your regular fight. And it weirdly works. She can level up just like everyone else. Although, of course, most of her level ups are passive, as you can't really change much in these rhythm games. But again, I still found it compelling and completed all of her events. Which, speaking of that, while there are side stories, just like in other characters, most of her content can only be done through her agency office, through the events calendar, and honestly, it just made it a lot easier to go through it all of her content since there isn't much reason to run around the map with her as she has no forced random battles. Also, to help with the pacing of being put suddenly into a rhythm game, her chapter is intertwined with Akiyama's, like I hinted at earlier. Akiyama here kinda taking a murder mystery approach as someone that he lended money to having supposedly killed themselves, and that being tied into Haruka's story. And honestly, this third part was my favorite part of the game for various reasons. The story kinda just stands out on its own, it's interesting, and the diversity of playing between these two characters keeping it even more interesting, pacing wise, more than just changing to a new character and feeling like you're starting over, which is what happens with the other characters in this game. And going into the gameplay, in my personal opinion, Akiyama is the best character in the Yakuza series so far, gameplay wise. He is borderline pulling some Devil May Cry combos in this game, doing even me there combos, which is insanely unrealistic but equally insanely satisfying. This felt like the peak of the enjoyment I had with this game, and unfortunately, as we move on to our fourth part and the fifth protagonist, where we have our new character, Tatsuya Shinada. He's a baseball player that gets banned from playing baseball because of some Yakuza business that is forced on him. The story just kinda starts dragging a bit. While Tatsuo does end up being an important character to the story, and it's through his story we bring back another very important character in this series, which I don't want to name reveal as it is a major twist in the game. And you know, as a premise, it's good and enticing, but it comes so late in the game that at this point I'm just like, please, the story is complicated enough. It doesn't need more. Yakuza 5 story feels overcomplicated. This was a fine line the other Yakuza games rode, but for me at least, Yakuza 5 pushed it over the edge and left a sour taste in my mouth. Also, while Tatsuo isn't a bad character, he kinda just comes off as a goofball, which at this point just doesn't help. Gameplay wise though, he is interesting in a way that he's the first character to actually have a big focus on weapons, since he is a baseball player. And this gives me a chance to explain a change that was made to the weapons in this game. And now your proficiency with each weapon depends on how much you use it, being able to level up your ability with each weapon by obviously using it a lot. Now this change is kinda whatever. Maybe it's noticeable for people who really get into the weapon system in this game, but not so much for me, who mostly uses the environmental weapons, which you can also level up for reference, and the ones that drop in battle. So, you know, by the end of the game, my bicycle bashing skills were much higher than my sword ones. So for me, he also suffered from that in the gameplay department. But his gameplay isn't bad, all things said. Just to me, it felt like a step down after playing the Akiyama chapter. And it's with this character we are led into the finale, which goes on for so long and it's so full of cutscenes. For me, how burned out I was already on this part of the story, this was like the final nail in the coffin. It's not like it's a bad ending, gameplay wise, even if I had a bad time because I went unprepared for the final fight, and your only opportunity to prepare for that fight is almost 2 hours before that, and in the end of it all, it just didn't feel satisfying to me. It really brings the game down because besides this, it really feels like Yakuza 5 is the culmination of everything learned from other Yakuza games to make one final game and push the PS3 to its limits. But it's also 2020 or 2021, depending when this video comes out, and we know that that's not true. Kazuma's story wouldn't end until Yakuza 6. Thankfully, I guess. Cutscenes here, no joke, rival Metal Gear Solid 4. And it's just as convoluted. And to be fair, in the same way that I like Metal Gear's convoluted story, I'm sure a lot of people will like this one. But for me, it felt excessive. Especially since this was such a long game already. And because of all that, this game unfortunately is an 8. Which is sad. We leave the PS3 era without breaking the 9 barrier. But not to spoil other things I may or may not be working on, but who knows, there might be a 9 on the horizon. Regardless, Yakuza 5 is still a great game, and in 2020, 2021, a great value if you just want a Yakuza game that will last you a while. Especially now that the Yakuza collection is coming to PC and Xbox, so it's a lot easier to recommend as well. It's coming to Game Pass as well, which will mean a lot of you have a lot easier access to it. And if I can say something odd, completely unrelated, I wish Akiyama's story was longer, but the overall game shorter. That is all. Thank you for watching. I hope this review was helpful to you, but maybe it made you subscribe and also like and comment, and thanks and bye.